Just a few years ago, Pride marches in Kyiv were surrounded by more police officers than participants. Today, thousands of LGBTQ+ people serve in the Ukrainian military. Public support for equal rights is at a record high, and the largest Pride march since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion has just taken place in Kyiv. So, why do LGBTQ people, many of whom now serve in the military, still lack basic protections in Ukraine? Hi, I am Katerina Denisova, a political reporter at the Kyiv Independent, and today I'm filling in for Anna Belokur, who is on vacation. This week, we'll look at how attitudes toward LGBTQ people in Ukraine have changed over the years, why the law has not kept pace, and why progress on this issue could prove critical to the country's future. Before we look at where LGBTQ rights stand in Ukraine today, it's important to understand where the country started and how far it has come. After gaining independence in 1991, Ukraine inherited many Soviet-era attitudes toward gender and sexuality. In the Soviet Union, same-sex relationships were criminalized. Those who weren't prosecuted often ended up in psychiatric institutions, where homosexuality was treated as a mental illness. While the United States had its first openly gay presidential candidate in 1980, there were still no public discussions about LGBTQ rights in the USSR. The topic was deeply taboo, much like sex itself. There was even a famous Soviet saying, "There is no sex in the Soviet Union." After decades of that influence, Ukraine remained a highly conservative country for many years after independence, and social stigma surrounding LGBTQ people remained widespread. According to one poll from 2007, more than 80% of Ukrainians said they considered homosexual relationships unacceptable. The only behaviors they view more negatively among those on the list were shoplifting and drunk driving. But over time, especially after the Euromaidan revolution on 2013-2014, Ukraine began rapidly moving toward democratic values and away from Russian influence. As Ukrainian democracy grew stronger, so did movements advocating for women's rights and LGBTQ equality. But the change was far from universal. A sizable far-right opposition continued to campaign against LGBTQ rights, saying it was defending what it called traditional values. Attacks on LGBTQ people and community events weren't uncommon. At the same time, Pride marches became a regular annual event. More spaces emerged where queer people felt safe and welcome, and more Ukrainians felt comfortable coming out. Even though LGBTQ events often required extensive police protection, the fact that the state provided the protection was itself a sign of progress. One symbolic moment came in 2021 when a pride rave was held directly outside the presidential office. By 2025, around 78% of Ukrainians supported equal rights for LGBTQ people, an increase of 14 percentage points since 2022. And it's no coincidence. Russia's full-scale invasion played a role. At first glance, it may seem strange that support for LGBTQ rights grew while Ukraine was fighting for its survival. But for many Ukrainians, embracing LGBTQ rights became part of a broader effort to distance the country from Russia and the values associated with it. In Russia, public expressions of LGBTQ identity are banned, while the so-called international LGBT movement has been labeled an extremist organization, despite no such formal organization existing. For many Ukrainians, moving in the opposite direction became another way of affirming the country's European and democratic path. The war also brought greater visibility to LGBTQ people serving in the military. As LGBTQ Ukrainians fought and died alongside their fellow citizens, many earned a new level of respect and recognition from broader society. Yet, while public attitudes have changed dramatically, the law has not changed nearly as fast. Last week, Kyiv hosted its largest Pride march since the start of the full-scale invasion, with around 5,000 people taking part. The Kyiv Independent attended both the march and a counter-protest organized by opponents of LGBTQ rights.
Наші родини – частина України! Наші родини – частина України!
We are following the Pride March as the column is moving through the streets of Kyiv, with participants carrying banners and flags and calling for equal rights. The first Pride took place in Kyiv in 2013, and this year marks the third time the march is taking place during Russia's full-scale war. This year, participants are calling for the current version of the civil code not to be adopted, civil partnerships to be recognized, and the stronger accountability for the hate-motivated crimes.
I'm bisexual. I believe people have the right to love whomever they want to love, and to marry whomever they want to marry. It should not depend on gender, and no one can decide who another person should be able to marry.
Before, I couldn't express myself as freely as I can now, but there are still problems that need to be discussed. That's why we protest and we chant. We want to have the rights that we should have simply by birth, and not have to fight for them.
Ukraine wants equality. Ukraine is fighting very seriously on the front line, and there are members of the LGBTQ community fighting on the front line. They want the same rights as everyone else, and basically it's about love. So people who love each other should have a right to be together. That is going to be part of the European Union, and so if Ukraine wants to be part of the European Union, this is what they'll do.
As an active duty service member, it is very important for me that rights and partnerships are equal for everyone in Ukraine. Because I am now seeing situations where men and women can't see their partners, who are active duty service members, because legally they have no right to do so. I believe that all of you who are protesting today are the people who are fighting for the future of Ukraine and fighting for us as well. Our path toward European integration is currently being stalled, but we keep fighting for it. People should know that there are LGBT people here, and there are many of them, even in the military, especially in the military. Unfortunately, not everyone can speak about this openly, but we will continue to fight.
It so happened that my whole life has been a constant coming out and constant advocacy. I am here not only for myself, but also for my husband, whom I've been with for 8 years. We've been married for 4 years under American law, and for the past 2 years, he has been voluntarily fighting on the front. Today, unfortunately, he couldn't join us. He came this morning to bring me here and then headed to the front. I'm here in the soldiers column because I want to have the same rights as all other heterosexual civil couples. Because we all defend Ukraine equally, those of us on the front, like my husband, but we don't have equal rights.
Separately, early in the day, there was also a march opposing Pride here in Kyiv, and it included supporters of the so-called traditional values and far-right activists.
Слава Ісусу Христу! Навіки славу! Ава Марія! Не озвуть! Ава Марія! Не озвуть! Ганьба! 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 Ганьба!
The issue is not just lesbians and homosexuals. The issue is the political LGBT movement, which aims to abolish the natural order, family values, the definition of marriage, the definition of family. They are encroaching on the basic, fundamental things that enable society and people to exist. Therefore, we emphasize that demonstrations like Pride are a threat to national security. This is not just a threat to public morality. Yes, it is a threat to public morality, but it is also a threat to national security. It affects demographics, contributes to demographic decline, and leads to the moral degeneration of society. That's why it is very dangerous. We oppose this and join these protests.
I am for traditional values. God created us to have families, to have children. I came here with my child, my family, and close friends to support traditional values. How is Ukraine supposed to keep reproducing? How are children supposed to be born? Or how do you see it? I am only for traditional values.
We have gathered here with religious organizations and nationalists. It is written in the Bible that men started having sexual relations with other men, and God did not like this. It is simply shameful. What do our children see? What do young people see? What values are they being raised with?
Do you think LGBT rights have been expanding in Ukraine recently?
Well, there are certainly efforts on their side to promote them. They are doing everything they can, but right now, during the war, this is completely the wrong time for it. That's why we're holding this counter-demonstration today in response to their event. They have the right to show who they are. We agree with that. And we are marching to show our point of view.
My son was killed near Bakhmut in 2023. I believe he didn't die so that this kind of movement could develop here. We are better off with traditional family values. We are with God.
According to the Constitution, everyone already has basic equal rights and equal protection under the law, regardless of their political views, religious beliefs, or anything else. That's what it says, so it's not entirely clear to me what rights they're actually fighting for. It seems more like they're seeking privileges rather than rights. But as for family, ever since the concept has existed, a family has meant a father, a mother, and a child. Or children. They want to distort that. What they're trying to call a family simply isn't a family.
Thanks to your support, we've just reached our biggest community milestone yet, with more than 4,000 new members joining the Kyiv Independent. To everyone who became a member, thank you. Your support keeps our independent journalism going. If you have not joined yet, we'd love to have you as part of our community. Our members get exclusive benefits, including the chance to have their questions featured on this show. You can learn more through the link in the description. Opponents of LGBTQ rights often frame the issue in absolute terms. But today, the debate in Ukraine is not even about legalizing same-sex marriage. It's about smaller but important legal changes that would give LGBTQ people basic protections while bringing Ukraine closer to EU standards on equality and human rights. The lack of progress has not gone unnoticed abroad. In its 2025 report, the European Commission said that while public acceptance of LGBTQ people in Ukraine has increased, progress on key legislation has stalled. In 2023, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that Ukraine had violated the rights of a Ukrainian same-sex couple and must create a legal framework to recognize same-sex relationships. As part of its path toward EU membership, Ukraine is expected to introduce such legal recognition. Legalizing same-sex marriage would require amending Ukraine's constitution, something that cannot be done under martial law. But introducing civil partnerships is a much simpler step, and one that has been debated in Ukraine for years. The issue is especially important for LGBTQ soldiers. While the exact number of LGBTQ people serving in Ukraine's military is unknown, the LGBTQ+ military NGO estimates they could make up as much as 10% of those defending the country. That's tens of thousands of people. Yet, they still don't have the same legal protections as other Ukrainians. If an LGBTQ soldier is seriously injured today, for example, their partner cannot be recognized as their primary caregiver. Civil partnerships would change that, by granting couples many of the legal rights currently reserved for close relatives, including rights related to medical decisions, inheritance, and property. The proposed law would apply to both same-sex and opposite-sex couples. 2 civil partnership bills have already been submitted to Parliament, but lawmakers have yet to move either of them forward. We spoke with Alexander Demenko, a Ukrainian veteran who took part in the defense of Azovstal, survived Russian captivity, and now advocates for LGBTQ rights.
Ми маємо забезпечити наскільки це можливо комфортно службу.
We have to create acceptable conditions for LGBT people to serve in the military. If we do that and minimize discrimination, it will have a very positive impact on mobilization. In other words, many members of the LGBT community want to join the army, but simply can't because they're afraid they'll be bullied or face other forms of discrimination. Right now, Ukraine is paving its own path. We are shaping a new culture, a new understanding of LGBT rights, one that will be different from the rest of the world.
Stalled progress is not the only concern here. Some activists and legal experts now worry that legal recognition of same-sex couples could become even more difficult. The reason is the draft of Ukraine's new civil code, one of the country's most significant legal reforms. Although lawyers spent 7 years preparing the legislation, and it was intended to bring Ukraine closer to European standards, the draft sparked backlash after Parliament unexpectedly passed it in its first reading in April. There are many problematic provisions. For LGBTQ Ukrainians, the biggest concern is that the draft introduces the concept of a de facto family union, while defining such a union exclusively as one between a man and a woman. They argue this could make future legal recognition of same-sex couples even more difficult. We spoke with Oksana Guсь, a lawyer with the LGBTQ rights organization Inside, about what changes are needed before the bill receives its final vote.
The revised civil code, the version Parliament passed on its first reading, was intended, among other things, to bring Ukrainian legislation into line with European standards. There's still a final vote to come, and 15,000 amendments have been submitted. But ultimately, it has drawn criticism from both human rights organizations and the public, with protests taking place. Why, in your opinion, has this situation arisen, despite 7 years of work on the updated civil code?
Why a document that took 7 years to draft ended up looking the way it does? I can't comment, I didn't write it. But I will say quite frankly that I personally would be ashamed to present such a bill to the public for discussion, let alone propose that we live according to this document. That's because some of its provisions contradict one another. Others restrict rights we already have. Instead of bringing us closer to the European Union, they do the opposite.
What could change for LGBTQ if the current version of the civil code is adopted without amendments?
If this code is adopted in its current form, or if only minor amendments are made but nothing changes in the big picture, it will mean that the entire LGBTQ community will be erased from the picture of Ukraine's population. In other words, if we say that 1 in 10 people belongs to the LGBTQ community, then imagine standing in a shop or in a public square and looking around. It would be as if 1 in 10 people simply vanished. In other words, they're there, but nobody sees them. Last year, for the first time, a court ruling recognized 2 men living together as a family in Ukraine. Right now, the LGBTQ community has the opportunity to rely on that ruling. It's not ideal and it's complicated, but that opportunity exists. If the code is adopted in the form they want, even that opportunity will be completely blocked. In other words, issues relating to family, children, marriage or registered partnerships, inheritance, and the recognition in Ukraine of same-sex marriages contracted abroad will all be eliminated, even compared to the current situation.
And what should Ukraine's civil code look like in order to meet European standards and bring Ukraine closer to the European Union?
It should be drafted in accordance with European Union law, taking into account the case law and rulings of the European Court of Human Rights, as well as the approaches of European judicial institutions and the Court of Justice of the European Union, which have already established their position on the LGBTQI community. In other words, they recognize that these people exist and that they must be protected. Speaking specifically about Ukraine, there is a case that Ukraine lost. Maimulakhin and Markiv versus Ukraine. It was heard by the European Court of Human Rights. It's a fairly straightforward case involving 2 men who had been living together for a long time, one of whom served in the National Guard. They had no way to legalize their relationship in Ukraine. They applied to several local civil registry offices, but their applications were rejected. As a result, they turned to the European Court of Human Rights.
Since 2023, Ukraine has been required to take action to comply with the European Court of Human Rights ruling, but it has failed to do so.
You recently had a meeting, along with other human rights activists, with Ruslan Stefanchuk, the architect of the Civil Code and Speaker of Parliament. How did the meeting go?
This meeting was more of an introductory session, intended to allow the speaker to hear the key issues raised by the LGBTQI community. We have a Speaker of Parliament who initiated the meeting, attended it, and was open to dialogue. We also have lawmakers who weren't at the meeting, and lawmakers have very different views. From what I've seen in the media, I understand that some of these lawmakers are openly homophobic. They've said quite openly that the new civil code will not contain a single provision recognizing any rights of the LGBTQI community. To me, that's a wake-up call showing just how divided attitudes in Parliament are. Instead of looking toward Ukraine's future as a European state, these lawmakers, for some reason, seem more focused on their own concerns, their own dissatisfaction, reluctance, misunderstanding, and fear. Maybe they are afraid, but to overcome that fear, all they need to do is read up on the subject, talk to experts, and realize that homosexuality isn't transmitted through the air or in any other way. In other words, recognizing the rights of the LGBTQI community does not mean that heterosexual people will become homosexual. That's simply nonsense. It's nonsense.
Ultimately, whether Ukraine makes further progress on LGBTQ rights depends on political decisions. And for now, there appears to be little political appetite for moving these reforms forward. Because of Ukraine's conservative history, politicians have traditionally avoided publicly supporting LGBTQ rights, or even discussing the issue at all. Even today, only a handful are willing to do so. In one of his rare public comments on the issue, President Volodymyr Zelensky recently voiced support for broader public discussion about LGBTQ rights.
I believe it's important to talk openly about everything as a society, and that's completely normal. We're all here defending our country. We're all the same, and we all have equal rights, regardless of whatever prejudices people stuck in the 15th century may have. We're modern people.
For a Ukrainian president to publicly address LGBTQ rights at all is significant. But so far, Zelensky's support has remained largely symbolic. Responding to petitions calling for civil partnerships, he said such a legal framework should exist and that he would sign the law if Parliament, where his party as a majority, passed it. But first, lawmakers have to approve it, something Ukraine's current parliament, now in its 7th year, has increasingly struggled to do even on major legislation. As Ukraine moves closer to the European Union, however, it may become increasingly difficult to ignore the legal inequality facing LGBTQ Ukrainians, including those serving on the front lines. For Alexander Demenko, a Ukrainian veteran who asked President Zelensky that question about LGBTQ rights, that simply means the work is far from over.
I wasn't entirely satisfied with his response, but at least he opened up a dialogue. The dialogue with the government has already begun, and the fact that the president is getting involved in these issues is incredibly important. The state, through its various institutions, is made up of people, and all people are different. Some are homophobic, others are supportive. We need to work with each of them to take this step, and we're working on it. This isn't something that can happen with the snap of a finger. It's all a titanic effort, a titanic advocacy campaign that we've been actively engaged in for a very long time.
Hi, over the past week we received several questions from our members and selected one to answer. Our member Zhaba asks, Yulia Sviridenko is the Prime Minister, but I hardly see or hear anything about her role, activities, or quite frankly existence. She holds one of the highest government positions, but is she not in the inner circle? Is she a non-factor who does not bear mentioning? I don't mean that her government role is unimportant. I am referring to media here. I'm following Western and Ukrainian sources and Eastern European Baltic news too, and I've only seen her name in Ukrainian stories occasionally. So to answer this question, I'll give you some context. Sverdenko became prime minister last year after leading complicated talks as then economy minister on the long debated Ukraine-US minerals deal. And before that, she worked as a deputy to Andriy Yermak, a former head of the president's office. She has often been described as Yermak's person or his protege, which she denied. And Yermak was known to have influence over key appointments in the Ukrainian government, so Sverdenko's promotion to the position of prime minister during a government reshuffle was also seen as part of that influence. And what is interesting that formally under Ukraine's constitution, prime minister should be nominated by the parliamentary coalition. But in practice, Rudenko's candidacy was put forward by President Zelensky and later approved by parliament, which was seen as another sign of how power is concentrated in the president's office and that Ukraine's parliamentary presidential system exists only on paper. I think that Sverdenko is a visible political figure, and to me, she's definitely more visible than her predecessor, Denis Shmyhal, who was a prime minister for a record 5 years and now serves as the energy minister. And Sverdenko is regularly mentioned in news coverage and political commentary, but when it comes to Yermak's influence, when he was in the office, key positions usually went to people who were unlikely to challenge Zelensky's political standing or develop independent high political ratings. So I think that in this sense, Sverdenko fits this criteria. And she is very loyal to Zelensky, she is close to him, but I don't think that she is closer than some other officials, for example, like Rustem Umerov, Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, or she's part of Zelensky's more limited inner circle. But she may be aiming to get closer to it. That's all for this week. We will be back next Sunday with more news from Ukraine. If you found this video interesting, please consider becoming a member of the Kyiv Independent community. You can find more information in the description below. Thanks for watching and see you soon!